Hello everyone, my name is Shelby Barner and I am Discovery Bound's Young Adult Manager. Discovery Bound Outreach is super grateful to be partnering with First Church of Christ Scientists, Laguna Niguel, California, and offering this inspiring talk, What Are We Here to Do? So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, who's from this church, to introduce our lecturer.
Our speaker, Nate Frederick, is a Christian Science practitioner who splits his time between Boston, Massachusetts, and beautiful Booth Bay, Maine. Nate loves traveling and sharing insights into the universal power of God and how this power can bring about good in our individual lives. As a media producer, Nate created the award-winning Daily Lift podcast for the First Church of Christ Scientist in Boston, the headquarters of the Christian Science Church. Nate loves music, being out in nature, and baking cakes for his friends. But he would say that his greatest passion is to help people through prayer. Please join me in welcoming Nate Frederick.
Hi everyone, I am just so delighted to be with you tonight to talk a little bit about why we're here, why we exist, how we can do the most good in the world, how we can find our true selves, and what is our mission in life. So before I jump in, I just want to give you a few housekeeping notes. This lecture, I'm going to talk for about a half an hour, just lay down some ideas for discussion, some food for thought for you. And then I hope it opens up to a very fruitful Q&A period. Today's topic is, what are we here to do? What a great question. What are we here to do? I've just found so often in life that when people really have a clear sense of their mission in life, everything else seems to fall into line. The joy, the peace, the wonderful way of relating to people that we all desire to have and experience, that tends to fall into line naturally when we really understand our purpose, especially when we understand it from Jesus' teachings. I think Jesus is the most influential person who ever lived, and this is usually the consensus with most historians. And Jesus, he said some very pithy, straightforward statements in the Bible about why he was here, about who he was. And I think when people read the Bible, they often get this amazing sense of goodness and love and joy and peace that flow from the words of Jesus. Jesus said, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall live forever." He had this indomitable faith in what he was saying really would stand the test of time. And he was saying it at a time when the Roman Empire had control over Jerusalem, and people were worried about the Middle East, just like people are right now. And yet Jesus didn't try to change the politics of the area. He didn't try to become a king. He found a better way to renovate life and experience true health and well-being. And he did it through prayer and through living out his mission as what he called the Son of God. Now, recently I was talking to a fellow Christian, and they were kind of taken back a little bit when I started to tell them about Christian Science, because they worked from a premise that we're born sinners, and that's how we should think and define ourselves. And by God's love, we can be saved, but our nature now is lost and is in sin. And that is how it appears often in our own lives day to day. We seem to be lost. We seem to be not thinking straight in many ways, not living out a perfectly godly life. But one of the things that I'm going to share today from the standpoint of Christian Science is that each one of us has a spiritual identity that's entirely good, that's entirely spiritual, and that our true nature is made up of God, that we really exist in and of God. And that might sound like a hard thing to take in or believe, but I think it's the most logical thing to believe in the world, and it creates the best experiences in the world. And so one of the things as I read the Bible that really strikes me and that is without controversy, you could say, is that Jesus was a healer. He went around doing good, And he healed people who were, diseased and who had chronic problems of all sorts, often instantly. And he did it through a purely mental method. And one of my favorite lines in the Bible comes from the book of Philippians, which says that we can have the same mind that was in Christ Jesus. And there are all sorts of different translations for this. Some translations of the Bible say, have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had, have the same mindset that he had. And I think this is a beautiful promise, because if we begin to perceive life as Jesus perceived it, we can have and experience the same kind of healing. And Jesus, I don't think he thought of himself as so different than all of us. When he taught everyday people, he didn't take the cream of the crop and teach the people who had been studying theology their whole life, or the rich people who grew up with lots of resources. He took everyday fishermen and everyday women, and he took them under his wings, and he said, you guys are going to do the same things that I did, and even greater. He really believed that everyday people could do the things that he did. And I think it's because he thought that they could live out the same generic mission that he had. And now Jesus said he was the light of the world, and he said that he would bring light onto people so they wouldn't walk in darkness anymore. And I think I've really thought a lot about this over the years, of what that means to be the light of the world, because Jesus also said that very thing to his disciples. You are the light of the world. He saw them as he saw himself. And if you take a light beam, and say a light beam was coming through a window, and you said to a light beam, you're too bright, you're no good, you're not as good as the other folks on Instagram, it wouldn't change the nature of the light one bit. If you walked up to that light beam and started to manipulate it, you put a vaccine in it, you started to change it physically, it wouldn't stop it from shining or change its identity one bit. Or if you tried to put it into a box and perhaps go into another room, open up that box, would the light beam be in the box? It wouldn't be in there, because it can't be boxed in. And this analogy, for me, I've just found it so helpful over the years, because often the way we think about ourselves and what we're here to do is we think about it based upon what people have said to us and what we've said in our lives. Like, we're defined by our material past. We think about who we are as defined by what's physically occurred within our body or within the body of our thoughts. And we think about our lives as defined by how we've been boxed in. This age with this image in the mirror, from this town, having these different physical experiences, and we box ourselves in. And yet the light beam, it's not defined, its mission, its purpose, its shine is not defined by any of those material parameters. It's made of the sun, just one thing, and it's brand new every moment. And I think when Jesus said he was the light of the world, it was as if he was saying, God is the sun, and I am that which expresses the sun. He said, I and my Father are one, but my Father is greater than I. Just like the sun is greater than any one light beam, but you can't have a sun without light beams, right? And the light beam, everything that the light beam gets comes from the sun, everything. Well, when I was in college, I was on a deep pursuit to discover universal truth, to discover God. And from an early age, I had always deeply wanted to know God, but I kind of felt left out. I had a best friend who lived down the street from me. He was the son of a Baptist minister, and their family seemed to have remarkable experiences happen all the time. But my family wasn't very religious, and I had some little encounters with God, but it didn't seem like I had the same pedigree, the same upbringing, the same kind of box, the same lot in life that my friend had. And I was kind of left out, and I didn't feel like I had a gift of Christianity or healing or anything. But as I grew up, I started to read some very inspirational books over the years, and when I got into college, I just started to study all the saints and yogis and sages throughout the ages. I started to study religion in an academic sense from a standpoint of looking for universal truth. the author of The Brave New World. Aldous Huxley, in his latter years, wrote a collection from the mystics of the world called Perennial Philosophy. And I was studying religion through that lens, looking for the universal ethics and healing experiences that are common in all eras and that maybe express universal truth. And at the time, I was kind of cherry picking from different thinkers, and I was reading a lot about the mind-body experience from modern writers. And yet I didn't plan to land on any one teaching that would be the end-all for me. But when I read this book called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, it spoke deep to my heart. And it felt like a coming home experience to me. It felt like things I had always known deep down inside now were articulated so sublimely and thoroughly. And it was an amazing experience. And I started to look at people differently. My dad was an alcoholic at the time. I started to change my vision of him. And years and years and years of trying to quit alcohol, all of a sudden one day he just did, as I was viewing him differently. And our whole relationship changed, became a beautiful one. He was my best friend there on out. I was doing personal care work for a woman who was chronically ill. I started to view her through this lens of God, and I started to view her through that light of God's love. And quickly she was up on her feet, taking dance classes, taking art classes. But the one healing at that time in my life that I think made the deepest effect on me was I had a good friend who was a Christian Scientist, and I just saw her as this light of the world. She just seemed to light up everybody in her path. And there was one point where it was finals week, and everybody had to go to these classes to do their final exams, and there were a lot of art openings that people were presenting their work, and a lot of places to go, a lot of things to do. And my friend all of a sudden got poison ivy or poison oak, something like that, all over her face. And it got so bad that it looked like she was wearing a monster mask. I mean, her whole face was deformed, and it really looked gruesome. And she was just hysterical. She wasn't her normal self. She just seemed to be flooded with dark thoughts. What are people going to think about me? And she had a professor who actually knew a lot about this Christian Science perspective, and he wasn't very pro-Christian Science, you could say. And she was really worried about going to his class, and it turns out he found out that she had this problem, and she was really pressuring him to go to the doctors. And my friend, she started to pray about this, but she didn't really seem to get anywhere at first. But eventually she called a Christian Science practitioner, someone who works full-time to help people through prayer and through this lens of Christian Science, and help let people understand what their mission in life is and why they're here and what their real identity is. And as she spoke with this practitioner, she described it later as a waking up experience. She said she just remembered that she was spiritual. That word remember, again, member, belong to something, right? And she all of a sudden realized that she belonged to God, and that she was made of God, in and of God. Just like that light beam, it's brand new every moment. Put a hand up to a light beam for as long as you want, take it down, it's shining brand new. And she wasn't defined by the image in the mirror that she saw, because that's not what the Bible calls the image and likeness of God. And she was defined by the spiritual qualities of God. Now, one way to think about God is just love itself. The Bible says God is love. And the beautiful thing about Christian Science and all true spirituality is it shows us that we're here to express this love. To be the light of the world is one way to talk about it. It is to express. A light beam, it expresses its source, the sun, right? That's what it's designed to do. That's what its mission is to do. And my friend, she all of a sudden, even though her face didn't look any different, she went to this art opening on her own accord. She didn't have to go to this. It wasn't required. She went to this art opening where all of our friends were, all of our teachers were, and everyone who saw her at first they were shocked, and they were so concerned. And immediately she had this, what seemed to me as a miraculous ability to pivot the conversation, to see good in the people around her, to just mitigate and destroy their fear. Because it was like she had this light that was emanating from her. And whatever darkness someone was throwing at her, it just couldn't change that light. Darkness can't fight against light. You put a light in any room that's dark, there's just going to be light there, and the darkness is going to disappear. And it was an amazing thing to witness. And it just happened conversation after conversation. And it was such a joyous, happy, God-filled night. And not to your surprise, I'm sure, shortly after that, that whole disease that seemed to be on her face just disappeared like the darkness in the morning sunshine. And it disappeared like it never really was there or had any substance. And that experience made a deep and profound effect on me. I saw that this kind of Christian Science healing is an inside-out healing. It changes the way that we perceive ourselves and what we're designed to do and what we're here to do. And it shows us that as we give, then things are given on to us. As we express love, love is poured back to us. As we shine our light, light naturally comes back to us. And, we often think of health and joy and peace as something we need to obtain materially. We need to get it from some material pill or some intellectual book. But what Christian Science shows us is that it's all within us. The kingdom of heaven is within us. And we're here to express our source, God, divine love. So I want to go through some things now with kind of, I hope that healing just sort of opened up the view that we're looking at today, and take a few more lines of what Jesus said, very specifically why he was here, because I think Jesus, everything that he did, there was a metaphysical thought behind it. There was a spiritual understanding behind what he said. And if you look in the Bible, he said things like this. He said that he came to seek and save the lost. He said he came to have life and have it to the full, or allow people to have life and have it to the full, or have it more abundantly in some translations. He said he came to testify to the truth. And he said he did not come to be served, but to serve. And actually that last one stood out so beautifully in that healing to be with my friend, that she was just serving out goodness to people. She wasn't thinking about herself anymore. That sense of self-consciousness was replaced with just God consciousness. And she was perceiving the good that is God all around. Now, let's just take that first one for a moment, seek and save the lost. If you read about the parables that Jesus shares in the Bible, he shares quite a few parables about things being lost and then being found. And in every parable he shares about something being lost, something is always found. It's always recovered, as if there's nothing unrecoverable. I think Jesus was, in a theological sense, a universalist, meaning that he thought that everyone would be saved, that every creation of God, every one of us will ultimately, whether it's be slow or fast, will discover our perfection. And if you think about that sense of seeking something that's lost and saving it, I often think of, especially in the summertime, about puzzles. I love to do puzzles, and I was showing my little 4-year-old daughter this little image as I was preparing for this lecture today, and she said, "Oh, that's beautiful, a heart." And then the next thing she said was, "Oh, but a piece is missing. We have to find it." And if you've ever done a puzzle, maybe it's a 100-piece puzzle, and you get 99 filled in, and there's one left, you're just going to look at that puzzle, and there's something that just abhors a missing piece, because the puzzle expresses something complete, a whole idea. And every puzzle piece has a unique place, a unique niche to fill in that one unique expression that is that puzzle, that one complete whole. And religion in general, the word religion, it comes from a Latin word that means bringing together or binding together. And sometimes people think religion is about separating us. But when you read about Jesus' teachings, everything is about that unity and oneness of being. Jesus, he really expressed and understood, I think, what's called monotheism better than anyone, that there really is only one source, one God behind everything. In the Bible, if you read the very first chapter, the book of Genesis, it's this beautiful poem about creation. And it says that one thing, God, creates everything and it's good. And it's this beautiful essence of what creation really is like when we see it from the pure perspective. And when I think of God, I often think of life itself. Because often we think of many lives. I have a life, you have a life, you have a life. But really, we're all in and of life. And like, what life are we a part of? We're all a part of the same life, just one life. And I think that is God. You could say that this life is creating and sustaining us in this very moment. And well, that's what I think God is. It's the life that we all belong to, that we all express. But when we feel at one with life, not separate from life, when we feel at one with life, that's love, right? It's like whenever you feel like there's two separate people, but you feel so much good for another person that eventually you feel at one with them. You might call that being in love. And there's that sense of oneness. But you also experience that just walking out in nature. It seems like separate trees and sky is separate from you, but then there might be a feeling all of a sudden that you're at one with this, that you're at one with life, and the feeling is love. Well, I think each one of us has an integral place in life. We all express life in a unique way, in a way that's analogous to every number in the number system. If you take all the numbers, you just take random numbers like 213, 214, 215. If you took out one of those numbers, you probably haven't thought of that number today. Maybe you've never written that number down in your life. If you plucked out one of those numbers out of reality, all of reality would stop existing. In other words, like every banking system in the world would just collapse because that number is needed. All sorts of mayhem would ensue, worse than any virus could cause or anything. And that number as an idea is needed. That number is actually an eternal idea. You take number 214, it didn't evolve up to what it is. It didn't go through a process of evolution. A long, long time ago, 214 wasn't 213, and then it evolved up to a different number. And after a long period of time, that number, it's not subject to the second law of thermodynamics, often known as entropy, in other words, decomposition, death. That number, it's not born, it doesn't die, it's not subject to time or space, to any of our concepts of materiality. It just is. And it's an idea, because you could write that number down and erase it, and nothing would change about reality. You would have to pluck the idea of it out of reality for problems to happen. And the principle of mathematics needs every representation, every whole number, you could say. And I think we're more valuable than numbers to God. And I think even though it appears on the surface that we're subject to birth and decay, that we're defined by a certain amount of years and that sort of thing, and our material experiences, I think we are ideas of God, that we have a fundamental spiritual existence that transcends time and space, that transcends whatever stage of life we seem to be at, and that our real identity is just defined by God, our source, what you could call spirit, the opposite of matter. And I love to think about what Jesus said about bringing life and life more abundantly, or life and life to the full. Because so often in life, we see things not in terms of that Genesis 1, just one thing going on perspective. We see it in terms of duality. And in the second chapter of Genesis, the second chapter, you see a two-ness, divisiveness, two things going on in reality. There's matter, limitation, and there's spirit, this sense of infinitude. And they're always kind of at war. And you see this capricious sense of God being good and bad. He makes Adam, the first man, who's made up of matter and spirit. And then the two children, his progeny, start to fight against each other, because if life is made up of matter, we need to fight for it, because it's out there, and we need to fight for the good that's out there. It's not within us already. And that sense of life being material just causes mayhem. Now, Jesus, when he said to bring life and life more abundantly, often we think of life, if someone said, life and, what would you probably put? Death, right? Because we usually think of life in terms of opposites, light and dark, good and bad. Yet these aren't opposites. And I think this is the core of what Christian Science is all about. Now, take an analogy here for example. Like, in America, there's this idiom about a glass being half full. And if you had a glass that's half full of water, then, if you're a positive person, that would be analogous to focusing on the water that's in the cup. And if you're a negative person, within the context of this idiom, you would focus on the lack of water in the cup, and that represents a negative thinker. And often people just look at what's on the surface of life and make some judgment. They'll say, okay, there's some good in here. I'm going to focus on the good. Just like you look out in life, there's good things happening, bad things happening. I'm just going to focus on the good, and that's kind of positive thinking. And that's analogous to focusing on the substance, the water in the cup. And yet the lack of water in the cup, that's analogous to negative thinking, that lack of water is not something. It's not substance. It's literally the lack of water. Just like I think disease is not something of its own. It's a lack of health. Darkness is not something of its own. It's just our inability to see light in a situation. Like if we took a walk out today in the woods and we looked up at the sky, there would be vast darkness, pinpricks of light. But if you talk to an astronomer or a physicist, they would say that the universe is flooded with light, but our human eye is not sensitive enough to see it. That's why when the moon comes and it's shining, it's not because it has any light of its own. There's light all around it where we perceive darkness, but when something appears there and reflects it, we can perceive it with the human eye, but that light is already there all around it. And I think Jesus, he perceived that love and harmony and peace, all the qualities of God, are literally ever present. They're just what being is. And what we call evil or darkness or disease or decay or death, anything ungodly, that's our inability humanly to perceive that good in a situation. But Jesus came to bring life and life more abundantly. And I often think about it with that analogy in terms of a cup that overflows. There's a beautiful psalm in the Bible about an overflowing cup. And when we allow our cup, our lives to overflow with good, they can just overflow and fill up the cups, the lives of others. Now, you might ask, well, how do I do that? Well, if I had a cup in my house right now and it was half full of water, if I looked at it, it's not that I'm like a positive thinker or a negative thinker. I wouldn't focus on how much water is in my cup. I don't care. All that I care about is one thing, that I have a faucet in my home here that has just an infinite supply of water. There's a well in this house that I'm in right now, and that well has stopped working before. And when it stops working, that causes total mayhem, and you're really distressed, and you have to maybe go somewhere else. But I found that with God, God is infinite. God is love itself. If you ask God, give me love today, show me how to love, then God will give you something good to say, good to do. God, give me more love. Give me a love to express. Let me be that light of the world. God will show you another way to shine your light. You keep asking that question, you'll never run out of love. You'll never run out of inspiration from God. It just keeps on flowing. You don't love, and then, all out of love. No more love to go around. No, it's just not the nature of life. Life is infinite. Love is infinite. It's the one thing that's going on. And, to be whole, to be unified, there's that word integrity that just kind of came up a lot in my prayers as I was praying for this lecture. And, Jesus, or Mary Baker Eddy, the author of Science and Health, she talked about the Apostle Paul being worthy of his mission and correlated it to his character. That word integrity, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means the state of being whole or undivided. And so often in life, it seems like, we're living on a flat earth, and we're walking around, and that's what our physical sense perception of life presents to ourselves. But, the earth is not flat. It's a whole. It's a unified, beautiful earth. And to get that view, we need to get a higher, more heavenly perspective. And I think Jesus, when he was praying for people, he didn't just look at what his physical senses were saying. He lifted himself up. in order to seek and save the lost, he needed to sense that wholeness that's always here. And right where our lives seem to fall flat with sin and sickness and disease, that higher, more heavenly view helps us see the wholeness of being, like every one of us a whole number. And every whole number, you take that analogy of the number system, one number doesn't have to compete against the niche of another number. Even though we are all generically, I think we have that same mission that Jesus had, we all have a unique place in life at the same time. There's a sense of the beauty of diversity, and that we all have a beautiful way that we uniquely express God. Now, one thing is, though, in everyday life, it's not enough often just to know this kind of thing abstractly. Jesus said that he came to testify to the truth. And if you imagine that someone was convicted of a crime, they went before a judge, and they said, "Nope, I didn't do it. I'm innocent." That wouldn't necessarily free them. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And this book that I've been referencing, the textbook of Christian Science, for something to be a science, it means that it's based upon law, that it can be demonstrated, that it's universal. If you take mathematics, if you take an equation, 3 plus 3 equals 6, it's not relegated to any time period. It's not a gift that's given to certain people. It's not like a special math that a certain culture has, or a certain religion has dibs on this certain kind of science. All science, it can't belong to any one group. It's just a universal thing that can not be created, but can be discovered. Because it's eternal. It's not created by mortals. For something to be eternal, first it has to exist in the realm of ideas and not material things like numbers. And for a number to exist as a whole number eternally, there needs to be a mind that creates that idea, right? There's no idea without a mind. And since none of us created that number, there needs to be an eternal mind, because that number applies to all of us. And so I think of God as the eternal mind of the universe. The real thoughts that bless and heal come from God. The eternal. For something to be eternal, it's forever stable, it's forever good, because it's not subject to birth and decay and to chaos. All conflict, all discord, it comes from its sense of two-ness. If you have two things, like any violence, conflict, pressure, it comes from two things pushing up against each other. And if you just have one thing, there's no pressure. There's no division, divisiveness. So often in the times that we're living in, people feel depressed. I've been hearing that so much. I know the sponsoring branch of this church has been praying for people who have been depressed. And that word depression, one way to think about it is that prefix D means without and or of, and pression means pressure. And so it means of pressure, defining yourself by pressure. And if you see two things conflicting in the world and you're defining yourself by what you're seeing, that two-ness, that duality, that conflict of division, you might feel depressed. But we're not designed to do that. Our mission in life is to bring life and life more abundantly, to seek and save the lost, which means understanding the wholeness, the integrity, that every piece has its place in life. And it's to testify to the truth. What is that truth? Well, recently I had a call from a friend who was really struggling because there was an online mob that was just after this person to get them fired from their job. And I should say that we live in this wonderful time in human history where there's this beautiful upliftment of what you could call human rights. There's a real desire, I think, out in the world right now for equality to be seen and experienced like it never has. And in many ways, it is. It's amazing. And I love it. And I'm so grateful to be alive right now. And there are more and more people really understanding that we can't judge each other by the color of our skin or by our, human history, age, by any, decision that we have with our personal lives. And we need to value and respect everyone for who they are. And I love that, and it's amazing. And if you think of human rights, I was recently reading a book from the historian Yuval Noah Harari. And he's actually a Jewish man. And he was saying that human rights really, from his point of view, derived with Christianity. At least it was popularized with it. The Jews felt that they were the chosen ones. They felt like they had God on their side, but not other cultures and peoples. And yet Jesus, he really saw the dignity, the worth of every individual, I think. He took people who seemed to be the most corrupt, tax collectors, the most forgotten or despised, lepers, the most simple, just the fishermen. And he taught these people, and he went to these people, and he healed these people, and he loved these people. And Jesus, he was someone who I don't think made favorites. He wanted to restore the lost. He wasn't here to restore people who already got it, were already in the right place. He wanted to bring them back, to bring that sense of unity. In the Bible, there's this beautiful sense that we all have a perfect place. The Apostle Paul, he gives an analogy saying that the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker and are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. But my friend who was calling me, he actually seemed to be a pretty respectable person, but he was losing his job when he called me, and he was so distressed about it because there was this rumor, basically, that was, in this case, really was false about him. And so I started to really testify to the truth about him. But there was a lot of divisiveness in this situation. There was another crowd, a group, a different age, different view of life that held very different opinions, perhaps, than he did. And we all started to pray together to get a clear sense of the oneness of being here. And prayer is often symbolized by that coming together of two hands to one, which I think is about unity, oneness. And as I started to pray, I started to realize that everyone in this situation where there seemed to be conflict, they all had a perfect niche, like every number in the number system. They were all made of God, like every light beam. And if light beams come down, they don't cross paths in discordant ways. They all have a perfect place to shine. And as I was praying with my friend, he started to realize ways how he could be better and how he could love in a more unselfed way and how he could not react to any false accusation. And there just started to be this wonderful sense of love where hatred seemed to be so present in the situation previously. And that love just started to replace the hatred with everyone in the situation, like light replaces darkness. And there was a situation, a resolution that came about that really seemed to bless everyone and forward this organization. And it really seemed to be propelled by prayer in just wonderful ways. And I was just really grateful for this example because, just the idea that there's solutions that bless everybody. And Jesus was so humble. He said, I can of my own self do nothing. And when we don't hold on greedily to our human past or our human position, and just be willing to serve and do good and see good in others, solutions arise that can really bless everyone. And so we've been looking at some of these different lines here about seeking, saving the lost, having life and life to the full, testifying to the truth, and serving and not being served. And this really embodies the life of Mary Baker Eddy. She was someone who just really understood very deeply the profound effect of what she discovered in Christian Science. She felt that this discovery could revolutionize the world, and would. And I like to think about it in terms of if there was a great musician, and this musician was playing music that people had never heard before, and it was just transforming lives. And yet one day they said, you know what? I've discovered something so much more profound and life-changing for the world than my own individual compositions. I've discovered the science of music. And imagine if people just thought that music was a gift, or perhaps something, if you were born into it, your father was a great musician, he taught you, maybe you could do it, yeah. But people didn't realize that there was a eternal logic to it. And if you could imagine this musician saying to people, there are eternal relationships between the notes. Once you realize that, you can start to read sheet music, play any song in the world instantaneously. You can practice and really get better as you practice this true theory of music. Well, I think Mary Baker Eddy saw in Jesus' healing works and the way that he loved and brought harmony to people's lives, that there was a science there, a universal knowledge. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And she really unpacked it in this book. She wrote this book over a 35-year period, revised it over 300 times, really wanted to get every word in this book right so when people read it, they could heal. And one time to some church members, she wrote, "Shall it be said of this century that its greatest discoverer is a woman to whom men go to mock and go away to pray?" And she was someone who grew up in a time period where women weren't accepted in the pulpit, that she was living in America before women even had the right to vote, and women couldn't go and just start their own businesses and so forth. And yet she saw what she discovered was really going to change the world. And she really lived what she taught, even in her so-called leisure moments. In her latter life, she would take this little carriage ride as a short little respite to her hard-working days, just working for mankind, really trying to disseminate and teach people and forward the movement of Christian Science. She would have this little moment during the day where she would take a carriage ride. And in this little moment of leisure, there are so many stories of people viewing her, seeing her, and often her just looking out to them, clearly praying for them, often transform their lives. There's this wonderful book called Christian Healer that catalogs over 300 healing experiences from her prayers. And in this book, there's this little incident where a man who had hatred for Mary Baker Eddy really mocked her, and I think she was thinking about this man when she wrote that line about men coming to mock her. And this man just had this insatiable hatred for her and went to look at her just to kind of satiate his cruel obsession. And this is what this passage says in this book about this experience. It's quite remarkable. When he said, when Mrs. Eddy's carriage passed him at that gate that he went to visit her at, she smiled sweetly upon him. There was something different in this greeting from what he had expected, for he said he felt a flood of divine love such as he never dreamed existed on this earth. It quite unnerved him, and before he realized what he was doing, he crumpled up and wept like a child. And on his way home, he bought a copy of Science and Health, and he began the study of it. He was healed of some ailment, and he became a devoted Christian Scientist. Well, I just love that, and I hope you can all read more about Mary Baker Eddy's life. The biographies like this are just amazing, and her own biography, Retrospection and Introspection, a wonderful view into her thoughts. And you can really see that everything she taught and wrote really came out of her own life experience. It wasn't a philosophy at all. It was really born of revelation from God, from her deep reasoning, and from her own demonstration and healing. Well, before I open it up to questions, I see that some are pouring in. I just wanted to share one little last thing that Mary Baker Eddy wrote to her church members. She said, "May each member of this church rise above the oft-repeated inquiry, 'What am I?' to the scientific response, 'I am able to impart truth, health, and happiness. And this is the rock of my salvation and my reason for existing.'" And I think all of us have this mission to express God. And that means expressing love. It means saving the lost. That's the act of love. God is the truth itself. And so to express truth, we need to testify to it. We need to evoke it. Mary Baker Eddy makes a joke in this book. You don't stand before a blackboard and pray the principle of mathematics. You need to work it out. So we need to see and apply what you could call the laws of God to situations in our life to see healing, to see this truth of God expressed and demonstrated. And lastly, when you think of bringing life and life more abundantly, it's that sense of duality. We really need to overcome that, because everything about Jesus' life was about eternal life. And even when his disciples saw him die, they were so impressed with that picture of death that they even went back to their old life, fishing. Everything that they learned from him, all the healing, all the supernatural miracles they had witnessed, it wasn't as influential to their human minds as his death. And that when he came back and really proved eternal life once again, and finally, you could say, in a sense of totality, that really changed the disciples, and that they were never the same. And that's what really changed all of human history. And so he understood that his words would live forever. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall live forever. So they sure have stood the test of time, and I hope you got some inspiration from them as I've been picking apart some of these little mission statements. So let's open it up to questions here. Let's see what has come in. So it looks like, what if we feel we've missed the boat and that we're at retirement age, but we feel like we haven't done what we're here to do? Yeah, I think totally just to take your life off the timeline. I like the analogy that it appears that the earth, or the sun, I should say, rises. We talk about the sunrise, it comes up to high maturity. Eventually it decays, and we talk about sunset. And yet the sun isn't doing any of those things. If you got a high enough perspective, you would see that the sun is always just shining. And I think each one of us, that appearance that we're at a certain stage of our life, that's just a human view, but we're always shining. We're always an eternal expression of God. And I've found that studying the life of Mary Baker Eddy, life expectancy at her time was in the 40s. You know, for women, when she lived from 1821 till 1910 in America. And she, after a remarkable healing at age 44, she just at that point really started to go out and heal people. And up to that point, she just felt she had really not accomplished much in her life at all. And she was at the life expectancy for most women at that time. So it would have been, not unnatural for her to pass on after this apparently, critical injury she endured at that time, a fall on ice. But when she recovered from that through prayer alone, she just started to really see that every moment there's an opportunity to express God's love. And I can say that the Bible talks about one day with the Lord is like 1,000, and it's so true. It really is. You can be praying about things for days and days and days, but literally just one moment of divine consciousness can change everything. And so this is a timeless truth. And so we need to get outside of time. Time doesn't heal. We're not on a timeline. Everything about Christian Science is about eternality. It's about the here and now of absolute truth. And so that's a real joy in discovering, regardless of where you seem to be on the timeline. Okay, so separation from God, impossible. Although sometimes it sure can seem that way. How have you dealt with feelings of being separate from God? Well, that's a wonderful question. And I think we need to really not be so affected by what we feel and see. If you could see 2 + 2 = 5 to the same degree that you could see 2 + 2 = 4, I could write them on a chalkboard right next to each other, and they would look the exact same. And sometimes we have happy thoughts and bad thoughts, loving thoughts, hateful thoughts. They seem to be of the same substance. They seem to have the same weight in our consciousness. But one is absolutely true, and the other is literally absolutely false. It doesn't have any substance behind it. If you're going to build a house that's stable, strong, beautiful, wonderful, it needs to be built upon perfect mathematics. If we want to build beautiful lives, they need to be built on perfect thoughts, perfect feelings. And so when we have a bad feeling, a bad thought, I think more and more that we can see that it doesn't have substance to it. It doesn't have any truth behind it. Yeah, of course we feel it. Of course we see it. I would never see, when someone sees a diseased person or a horrible, violent act, of course you see it, just like anything else you see. But seeing or feeling something doesn't mean that it has real substance or eternal truth behind it. And the more that we really understand what is eternally true and substantial, the more we can just be not influenced or attracted to what is false. So the more you learn math, you're not, when someone is saying, no, 2 + 2 = 5, trust me, you're like, no, I know what it is. Like Mary Baker Eddy, when she was on her carriage rides, I don't think she had to struggle to see people in the perfect light of God, because she knew it like 2 + 2 = 4. She just knew that that was true and substantial about them. There's no off button to true prayer. Okay, so someone said, how do we overcome that duality effectively? Well, one thing I didn't say with that kind of analogy, we're talking about depression, defining ourselves of pressure. Well, that word expression, that prefix X, means without, and pression means pressure. So to be the expression of one thing, God, is to be without pressure. And so in a situation where there seems to be dualism, there seems to be different sides fighting against each other, I think we need to realize how deeply embedded that perspective seems to be in the human mind. The human mind is a concept of a mind separate from God in itself, what the Bible calls the carnal mind. And if you think about what this human mind is attracted to, when you watch a movie, every movie you watch, it's about conflict. I mean, have you ever watched a movie where that it's about and this is what the human mind does for enjoyment, entertainment. Have you ever watched a movie that's all about perfect peace, perfect love, perfect unity, perfect getting along? No, every movie it's about conflict and suspense, and it's about gossip and violence and whatever it is. And it's always about this sense of duality. And yet there's a yearning for that duality to eventually come together, for someone to fall in love, or to the violence to eventually end in justice. But we need to understand that unity is the very truth of being. It's not something that is optional. That God is one. There's one of my favorite lines in Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health is such a simple one, but she says, God is one. The allness of deity is his oneness. And if all that is going on is love, if love fills all space, life fills all space, truth fills all space, mind fills all space, then this divine intelligence is everywhere. If it's all, then it's of necessity just one. And when we understand more about God's oneness, God's allness, then we can feel this deep sense of security and joy and grounding. And we don't have to feel like we're waiting for things to get better, because health is something we express. It's something we live out from. We don't wait to get. We live out from. Health is the consciousness of harmony, divine love. And when we really gain that perception that Jesus had, live out his mission, then we can begin to see it in all arenas of our life. And someone says, how do you address brain and or consciousness? I'm not sure exactly what they mean by address, but people often think that consciousness is created by the brain. And because the reason is partly because if you open up a brain and you'll see things I'll have certain thoughts. And if you could see what's going on in my brain would light up at certain places. But that's no different than if I'm speaking to you right now and there's a thought and my lips are moving, my hands are moving. Of course, my body is correlated with my thought. But the question is, does body create thought, or does thought create body? Well, when you go to bed at night, you have a clear example of which one it is, because when you fall asleep, there's just one mortal mind at work, and that one mortal mind it creates a body just basically like we understand it now. If you tell me what happened in your dream last night, you'll probably say you were walking around, you were seeing things, maybe you were touching things. There was a whole material world in that dream that you were exploring probably. And when you wake up, you realize that that body that you had, what you were seeing and hearing and touching, maybe even tasting, all that stuff, it was created by a mind. And I think that gives us a hint that what we're experiencing right now is the same thing. I think we're all in and of God, the eternal mind, and the more we understand about life, the more we experience harmony and progress and goodness, because that's the nature of God, that's the nature of the eternal mind. But when I think of brain, I think of it as no different than any other aspect of our body. And so, the more we understand that thought creates experience, the more that we're not worried about, brain damage or body damage, because the more we look at life through an undamaged, pure, godly way, we can see goodness and wholeness right where it appeared to be damaged before. In praying, I've seen many issues where there has apparently been damage or injury to the body and even the brain that have been healed and adjusted through this kind of spiritual thinking. So, good question there. Someone said, how would you describe the difference between the human mind and mortal mind? Are they describing the carnal mind or duality mindset perspective? Yeah, this has been a bit of a question that has been disputed over the years, or perhaps there's some different perspectives. Mary Baker Eddy, she uses the human mind and mortal mind as synonymous at some points in this book. And there are other times she seems to differentiate them, mortal being really kind of a purely illusory consciousness. This concept of a mind completely separate from God, a carnal mind, what the Bible calls, a mind that's looking at things from a sinful or false perspective. And sometimes you use the word human mind or humanity as kind of embracing humanity. So it's working itself up to God. And the idea of, she sometimes differentiates like mortal from human, from the divine. And the human stage is a kind of a mixture of good and bad. And so, you'll read that, and she always uses mortal in a kind of negative way, in a limiting way. But often sometimes she'll use the words human or humanity to express a kind of transitional state, like on page 116, 117 of Science and Health. I think 115, 116 actually. She talks about the translation of immortal mind, and that's a place to kind of look at for your answer there. Okay, so someone else said, thank you, I really enjoyed this lecture. You're so welcome. Let's see if anyone else asked a question that I might have missed. Okay, any last thoughts before wrap it up? I'm just going to check the email, see if anyone has come in there. Well, someone is asking about praying about the homeless in their community. I think that's a beautiful question. I love to pray about all of these lectures and in the whole experience of Christian Science. It is a coming home experience. That's how I was embraced in it and how I experienced it when I first read Science and Health. And when people are searching for home, it's often a sense of it's good to address that they have value, that they're loved, that they're meaningful, to really give them a sense of purpose. That's why I think this idea of mission is so important, because often when people feel that sense of ennui, listlessness, I don't have anything to give to the world, how is my life going to make a difference, that sort of thing, then it's easy to get downtrodden, and it's easy to get, on the streets, to get in a bad situation if you don't feel like you have purpose. If you don't feel like you're needed. Every number in the number system needed. Even more so, each one of us needed to express God. And it's wonderful. I've had the opportunity to work with some folks who have been homeless and folks who have been in the prisons. And it's amazing when people really get a spiritual sense of their self-worth, really to feel loved by God, to feel that their mission in life is to express God and to give. They're not waiting to get. Then things can really turn around. I had one amazing experience some years ago where there was a man who seemed to not be of right mind, and I would pray for him on my walk home from work, and he would just utter swears at me, and he seemed to be violent, and people were scared of him. And every time I would share a little loving thought or pray for him, and it just seemed to get worse and worse over the weeks. And one point, I just put my foot down, and I just said, if he is spiritual, he's spiritual now. It was like, the earth isn't flat and a sphere. There's only one thing. Yeah, even though we see the flat earth day to day when we walk every day, perhaps, it's never been flat. It's always been a complete spheroid. And I just kind of sensed that he was always this pure, beautiful spiritual idea, totally needed, totally whole, totally complete. And all of a sudden, he just totally changed. He was just responding to me super lovingly, asking me questions about God. And from that point on, he started to hang out right outside my front stoop instead of around the corner. And I kind of jokingly often add to this healing that when you love your neighbor as yourself, sometimes you find yourself acquiring a new neighbor. And the healing really came full circle. And one day I could hear outside my window him talking to another homeless man who was walking by. And he was kind of unloading all of his problems. And this other man at one point stopped and so lovingly said, "Can I pray for you?" and I just thought that was so beautiful. And that man, he's no longer on the streets. I don't know where he is, but I certainly expect that he's living a brighter life now. So yeah, it's really been a joy sharing with everybody today. And again, I want to thank the sponsors of this event, the First Church of Christ Scientist in Laguna Niguel, California. You can check out their website, christianscienceinlagunaniguel.com. You can check out discoverybound.org. And we're just going to close here with Shelby taking us out. Again, thank you so much. Much love to everyone listening tonight.
Thank you, Nate, so much for sharing with us and answering all of those questions. It was wonderful to have you here with us tonight, and wow, it was truly inspiring. I also wanted to thank again First Church of Christ Scientist, Laguna Niguel, California, for partnering with Discovery Bound to offer this inspirational talk. Couldn't have done it without you guys. This talk will be available for you to watch again through the link that you have now, and it will also be available on Discovery Bound's website under the resource tab. And please feel free to share it with others. The more the merrier. I also invite you to check out Discovery Bound's event calendar on the website to learn more about other in-person and virtual events happening for 20s to 30s and all ages. And thanks again, Nate, and everyone who attended. Have a wonderful night.